These are the eyes of America, of black America. These are the eyes of the Africans, those lost and enslaved Africans. These are the eyes of the rest of the earth, the eyes of the birth and the eyes of the curse. These are the eyes of pain, the eyes of the slain, the eyes of resiliency, or better yet, the eyes of militancy. These are the eyes of the woman, these are the eyes of the man, these are the eyes of the revolutionary struggle, and these are the eyes of the American tussle. These are the eyes of prisoners, the eyes of listeners, the eyes of silence, the eyes of grief, the eyes of relief, the eyes of guidance, and the eyes of violence. When the revolution comes, these are the eyes of a survivor.
Criminals convicted and doing their time are complaining. Some say they're being singled out for extra punishment because of their politics. Pete Fuentes goes behind bars to bring us this report.
New Jersey State Prison in Trenton houses the most dangerous inmates in the state. Some prisoners branded as troublemakers or rebels wind up in solitary confinement.
I'm not a prison rebel.
Yet Ojore Nuru is segregated from the general prison population. A prisoner in a different form of solitary confinement called a management control unit. Once in MCU, prisoners are never told when they'll get out. Ojore Nuru has been in 8 years.
See, I'm being persecuted for a thought. The fact that I entertain thoughts that they don't approve of, I'm being persecuted.
I don't know what freedom is. I never experienced it. My ancestors were stolen from Africa and brought to America, right? So I was born into oppression. I was born into slavery. I experienced hunger. I experienced lack of clothing, proper clothing. I experienced racism, police brutality. You know, it was difficult. I was in prison for bank robbery on a political level.
Drop the gun now! Let's see those hands.
Roberts, Ojore Nuru, and Daoud
I became politically aware in prison.
40-year prison sentences for separate and unrelated armed robbery and assault convictions.
I was supposed to come to jail and be allowed to do my time like the other prisoners are allowed to do their time. So I'm being persecuted because of my thoughts, not because of what I've done, the fact that I entertain thoughts that they don't approve of.
I'm a new African anarchist. I have ties with various political formations, right, who are struggling against the oppression and aggression of the U.S. government.
The Black Liberation Army must take up arms for the liberation and self-determination of black people in the United States.
The prison administration felt that my presence in the general population would pose a threat. They feared that I had the ability to influence other prisoners to, you know, question authority or start organizing against them. And my affiliation with the Black Liberation Army and other formations posed a threat to the orderly running of the prison. So they isolated me in the management control unit.
MCURC notes your concerns regarding your feelings of persecution and discrimination based on your political affiliation.
These prisoners are dangerous. Dangerous because they have strong political or religious ideas and are capable of leading others to riot based on those ideas.
If the inmate is undermining the orderly running of the institution, where his activities are threatening the welfare, the safety of fellow inmates as well as staff, that's when he's going to find himself in MCU.
Floors up from our interview cage. We weren't allowed in for pictures, but these men tell me the units contain mostly black or Latino inmates. Minorities are the majority here.
And at one point I told them that, well, I haven't done anything. They said you could if you wanted to. And that's thought crime. This is supposed to be a democracy, right? But from my point of view, democracies don't exist in America. Only fascism does. I was kept in a concrete and isolation cage for 22 years for entertaining political thoughts that the government didn't approve of. I was a victim of no-touch torture. They placed me in a mental health unit, trying to break me psychologically. They placed me in a bloody cell. I was placed on no contact status, which means I couldn't do anything with a group or another individual, right? I would have to get visits by myself, I have to have recreation by myself. I studied psychological warfare. If you accept revolution, you have to accept all that it implies, right? That includes isolation. I prepare myself. I would read, I would write, I would meditate, I would do word study. And moreover, I had my outside support apparatus, and Bonnie was my main supporter, right?
For me, the history of control units, and I'm not talking about punishment units, there's a difference. The history of control units was political. A person doesn't spend 22 years in solitary confinement.
You're talking about Ojore, whom we saw in that piece.
And thousands of others throughout the country. Ojore wrote to me in February of 1986. I had already been working with ex-prisoners, prisoners, and their family members since 1976. So I had already been working for a decade. I was familiar with some of the issues. He lived in that concrete box for 22 years. And I felt like it was my obligation, not just for Ojore, but he was not the only one. This was a nationwide reasons.
Do you call isolation torture?
I call isolation torture, and the United States has signed the convention, United Nations Convention Against Torture. The United States has signed the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, and the United Nations agrees with me. The Center for Constitutional Rights has now filed suit on what they call communications management units, which are isolation units across the country. Prisoners like Ojore were members of the Panthers, the Black Liberation Army, the Puerto Rican Independence Army, the Chicano movement, the white radical movement, the American Indian movement. All of these young people were in opposition to government policies and ultimately to conditions of confinement in prisons.
Hearing and seeing a description of administrative segregation, control units, whatever you want to call it, solitary, as torture. Is that an accurate way to portray it?
No, Sandy, I don't think it's torture. I think, as you indicated, it's a necessary evil to maintain the orderly operation of the 13 prisons in the state of New Jersey. We have 25,000 inmates that are incarcerated. That's probably larger than the average suburban community here in New Jersey. And anytime you have that many people, whether they're inside an institution or whether they're out, they're prone to violent behavior.
Once my plight became public, right, people were interested in knowing, well, why are you? So then Bonnie would tell people about me. She would travel and speak. So I used to do a lot of corresponding. I used to do a lot of writing, right? So people would ask me, well, what do your cell look like? Or what do you do every day? So I just started making collages to illustrate what I was experiencing in isolation. You have to have a strong sense of self and purpose. You have to hang on to your convictions, your ideology, whatever that might be. I just accepted that reality, right? That, you know, one day I might get out, I might not get out. I was influenced by Emory Douglas of the Black Panther Party. He was a good artist. And I seen how effective the visual was in terms of getting the point across to the people. I would complete my collages, right, and send them out to Bonnie. Bonnie would take them to Staples and get them enlarged.
I have benefited enormously from what the people inside have taught me, from what they've asked me to read, from what they've asked me to publish. But how do you get through these long terms? How do you get through 30 years in prison? How do you own your mind if someone else owns your body?
I never allowed myself to become institutionalized, right? So I maintained what I call street contacts, or a street point of view, or world point of view, right? 28 years in prison, 22 was in the management control unit. And I had to go to court to get the court order to make them let me go on August 6, 2009. When I first got out, I went to Philly. I had to go shopping for new clothing. Being able to walk the streets, stepping into another world, another reality. I mean, it was just a relief. Once you become an enemy of the state and they haven't broken you psychologically, you'll always be surveilled. Since I've been out, I've been surveilled at the airports, train stations. I was profiled, in La Junta, Colorado, on I think it was January 10th, 6 months after I was out of prison, right? They accused me of threatening to blow up an Amtrak train. One of the passengers on the train, she thought she heard something she didn't hear when I was talking to somebody on the telephone.
He's going to want to use that for a pulpit too, but I'll try to shut him down on that. Okay. Oh God, we're in it now.
Oh yeah. Should just let him get off the train and go.
Oh, you should have said that he pulled a knife on you and shot the son of a bitch. He pulled something out of his pocket. It looked like a gun. Damn, it was a goddamn comb. I'm sorry.
My bad, it was dark.
I'm bad. Oh, well, anyway.
I found out that the district attorney and the arresting officer were discussing ways they should have murdered me because they were forced to dismiss the charges against me of threatening to blow up the Amtrak train. Well, I felt nothing because what was said was nothing new to me, but because I'm a black man in America, right? But to the general public, they need to hear those tapes. So I just went to my collection and just pulled it out. I have used my experiences to educate others. Me and Bonnie would travel around the country, do political presentations in churches, universities, etc. But I was determined that they weren't going to break me like that same thing would break other prisons psychologically.
And each of you have a pamphlet called Breaking Men's Minds. That was done in 83, 84, says I recall, or the absence of a letter is an alert.
Mm-hmm. So they define that technique, no touch torture technique in marrying. So they just spread it throughout the prison system. See, now what you have to do, you have to be conscious of what was going on to understand what was happening to you as an individual or a group.
The system making no sense, that it's a neo-slave system, that nothing has to be logical. It's like stepping inside insanity to deal with the criminal justice system. We engaged in community organizing, both locally, forming the Control Unit Monitoring Project, and nationally, forming the national campaign to stop control unit prisons. The American Friends Service Committee Prison Watch program works largely on conditions of confinement.
My activities with Prison Watch is I answer letters, I answer the telephone, we send out various publications, right? And the biggest request is for the survivor's manual, because most people are in isolation.
A survivor's manual written by people living in isolation, for people living in isolation. We have a women's survivor's manual written by women living in isolation, for women living in isolation. We collect the voices of people and write shadow reports to the United Nations Committee on Torture.
I told Bonnie if I survive MCU, I can get out. I'm here to support her, and she supported me. We got a backlog of incoming correspondences from prisons, right? That we can't answer because you only come in twice a week.
We get hundreds and hundreds of letters from men and women inside describing torture. It is nothing less than torture. We rely largely on students and volunteers. And as soon as a student walks in to Prison Watch, we know that they're very, very different because the work is very difficult.
Okay, and then are you willing to do 5 letters each time you come in, just so we can... Okay.
Prison Watch may be one of the few places in the country where all the work and all the struggle comes from the inside out.
Advocacy. If you educate people, you want them.
I won't claim any booming success. What's needed is social change, which is what abolition would be.
Anything that happened to me in prison, I would create a collage around. Because people on the street just wouldn't believe it.
Right.
And that's what goes on in America.
Right.
I feel that in terms of prison abolition, man, we need to, the prison needs to be blown up. That, to me, that's prison reform.
These are the eyes of prisoners, the eyes of listeners, the eyes of silence, the eyes of grief, the eyes of relief, the eyes of guidance, and the eyes of violence. These are the eyes of a survivor. Revolution come when the revolution come. Revolution come when the revolution come. Revolution. The eyes of a revolution come. Revolution come when the revolution come. Revolution come when the revolution come. Revolution. The eyes of a revolution come. Revolution come when the revolution come. Revolution. The eyes of a revolution come. Revolution come when the revolution come. Revolution come when the revolution come. Revolution. The eyes of a revolution come. Revolution come when the revolution come. Revolution. The eyes of a revolution come. Revolution come when the revolution come. Revolution come when the revolution come. Revolution. The eyes of a revolution come. Revolution. The eyes of a when the revolution comes.